Hey there guys, it's the Champ Dog here. Today I'm going to be talking you through my Lurrus Grixis list. So this is a deck built around Lurrus of the Dream Den. I was playing a similar list with Lurrus as a companion before the companion rules nerf, and a few other people were as well, and there were some similar lists running around Pioneer, just built around the interaction of Lurrus and playing Croxa out of the graveyard. Lurrus is a really powerful card. So even post-nerf, he's good enough to just throw in the deck and play as a regular creature. So I put this deck together about a week ago. It's Friday as I'm recording this. I built the deck, I believe, last Friday, and with some moderate play over the weekend, maybe around 10 hours, I got from Bronze to Platinum, dropping very few matches through there. There were a few changes in the deck at that point. It was a little more aggressive for part of that, a little more control-y for part of it. This is the list I've landed on and had a little bit more success with in Platinum, where I have been admittedly struggling a bit more. So just talk you through the basic function of the deck. As I mentioned, there's this interaction between Lurrus and Croxa. So Lurrus obviously lets you play things with CMC 2 or less out of your graveyard. Croxa fits that bill quite nicely, and the other thing we're recurring out of our graveyard is Soul-Guide Lantern. So that's sort of the core of how the deck gets advantage, how it can close out games quickly. Replaying Croxa out of the graveyard to deny our opponent cards and deal damage can be quite helpful, and obviously when we do escape him, he can close a game very quickly if he's left unanswered. So the rest of the game is sort of a disruptive support cast. Extinction Event, obviously a great sweeper. We've got removal in Murderous Rider, Heartless Act, and Engrath's Rampage. Rampage is a bit of a pet card of mine. I just like to play it in most lists that I can because it's very mana efficient and very versatile. It's maybe not the best card right now, but it is nice to have the option of answering an artifact where I otherwise don't. Obviously targeted removal is generally better and the sorcery speed holds it back a little bit, but I like this card. I find that it pulls its weight in most lists that I play it in, and it tends to be an auto include to me, usually as a 2-of. Soul-Guide Lantern, obviously very good in this meta, with lots of people incidentally using their graveyard for things like Uro, so this can shut down an Uro. It's not as good against Cat Oven decks, as they will usually have more food than you have lanterns, so it makes it a bit hard to stop cats recurring. But it can also just become a repeatable source of card draw for us with a Lurrus on the battlefield. We can pay 1, tap and sack this to draw a card, and then replay it using Lurrus's ability. And the other 1-drop I've got here, Opt. I like to run Opt where I can in my Grixis lists that play Croxa. Obviously it's just a little cantrip. It's not the most impactful card in the world, but it's a cheap way to fix an opening hand, for example, and it helps us fill the graveyard at a pretty cheap rate. Other Grixis lists that I've run often play Discovery Dispersal. For this list, I like the instant speed and the lower casting cost because I do have quite a lot of 2 and 3 drops and a slightly lower land count than, say, a classic Grixis control list where I might want 26, maybe even 27, depending on my curve. I've got 25 lands here, and I'll often find myself running through a game on like 5, 6 lands if I'm lucky. So that extra 1 mana for Discovery Dispersal is actually quite meaningful. Also, holding up an Opt can bluff an opponent into thinking we're holding up a Mystical Dispute, which we are also running. A lot of these other cards don't need a huge amount of introduction. Thought Erasure is a great card, it's been around forever. Heartless Act is just some great targeted removal. There are a few creatures running around with counters now, particularly in the mono-green Stompy list, so this can be a little awkward at times, but I found it overperformed. I don't know what I would really replace this with for 2 mana removal. I guess there is Tyrant Scorn. I just find this to be a little more effective at what I want to do most of the time. Croxa, as you've seen, Murderous Rider. Now, typically in a Grixis list, when I'm running Croxa, I will run Bedevil, as I mentioned with Opt. you want to fill the graveyard to help you escape Croxer, and Bedevil puts a card in the graveyard, which Murderous Rider does not. However, since this is a bit more of a mid-rangey list, I found the body to be relevant more often than not. Particularly, when you're getting into that grindy sort of top deck mode against some decks, just having that one extra body to apply that last little bit of pressure or chip away the last few points of their life total can be really helpful. So I do think in this list it's a better choice than Bedevil, although Bedevil also gives you the option to target artifacts, which would be very helpful against Cat Oven decks and the occasional Tomorrow Adventure. Angrath's Rampage can't really kill an oven very easily because the sacrifice lists will typically have food tokens that they can sacrifice to this. But overall, I like how Murderous Rider has been performing, so I've stuck with him. Mystical Dispute used to be in the sideboard, but realistically, the meta is almost entirely blue-green based ramp decks and Wilderness Reclamation. So I ended up moving this to the main deck to just have a little bit more cheap disruption. And because realistically I was boarding it in against most of the field, it's far more often that I'll keep this in than take it out, so it just made sense to move it into the main board, particularly when I wasn't really sure what I wanted to put in this slot. Extinction Event, very useful sweeper. Obviously sucks to exile your own Croxer or a Lurrus or something. We don't want to be exiling our own things, but it does let you choose. It helps answer Uro. It is helpful against more creature-based decks like the green Stompy lists running around. Shock Typhoon, obviously great, lets you cycle and create a little body. It's very versatile, it's somewhat Teferi-proof. It can't be countered, so it's quite relevant in a meta filled with blue-based decks that have a lot of bounce, have a lot of counter, have a lot of those sorts of interactions. This can be a nice instant speed way to get a body on the battlefield, either to block and kill something, or to pressure your opponent in their end step. So, as I said, I've gone through a few changes to the list over the time I've been playing it. I was running for Knight of the Ebon Legion at one point in the 1-drop slot as well. I do like Knight of the Ebon Legion. It does a whole lot for 1 mana. It is a great card. I'll just bring it up for those of you who don't know it. I'm sure most of you do. Ebon Legion. So here we are. So it's a 1 mana 1/2, and you can pay 3 to give it +3/+3 and gain Death Touch. And at the beginning of your end step, if a player lost 4 or life this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Knight of the Ebon Legion. So there's also a lot of ways. There's more ways to trigger the counter ability than you would think. For example, if you shock in a land and play Swift End on a Murderous Rider, you will have lost 4 life and you get a counter. This card can be very effective at pressuring decks that don't build a lot on the battlefield, such as Temerak and the Ramp lists. And it also plays nicely with Lurrus, being able to recur it from the graveyard. Ultimately, though, however, I found it to be a little bit awkward. As I said, this deck does not run as many lands as my traditional Grixis control lists. So having to hold up 3 mana to make this card relevant a lot of the time is actually really awkward. Obviously, if you're in a sort of top decking situation and you play this out of the graveyard and you're both sort of down on resources, it's great. However, I just found as a turn 1 play or even a turn 2 or 3 play, it doesn't really provide the sort of pressure that I want, and it creates for some awkward lines of play where I want to hold up mana to protect it or get in for damage, so I can't use my mana effectively for other things, or your opponent has a lot of instant speed interaction, so you're reluctant to activate it and get blown out for the turn, because if they remove it at instant speed, that's basically your whole turn gone to do nothing. So I ended up cutting it once I got to Platinum. I think I included it once I hit Gold and took it out at Platinum. As I said, I do think it's a good card. I just found it a little awkward more often than not. I do think this deck does want something like this, something that's cheap and recurable with Lurrus, but still applies relevant pressure later in the game. I'm really looking forward to Archfiend's Vessel from Core Set 2021. I think it might be a good inclusion as a 1-drop that can come back out of your graveyard as a 5/5 flyer. It obviously provides a lot of pressure. If I was going to include that, I'd probably include something like Call of the Death Dweller. Anyway, that's what I'm looking forward to doing with the new set. I also, at one point, I was not running Shark Typhoons. I ended up bringing those back in over a few other things that I've been playing with to just sort of increase consistency through having that cycling effect, and also, as I said, the advantages of having that instant speed, uncounterable body on the battlefield that replaces itself. And I have found that the deck overall has been a little more consistent with the addition of this to cycle into things that I need. As I said, I was running a couple of Dragon Gods at one point. I was up to 4 Lurrus at one point. I did have a couple of copies of Bedevil. I tried Neutralize in the slot that Mystical Dispute's in. But ultimately I've settled on this. 3 mana is a lot to hold up to counter a spell when I don't have a lot of other things I can do with it. Like, obviously I've got Opt and Shark Typhoon. But I don't always have those, and holding up 3 mana to only use it to cast Opt at your opponent's end step if they didn't cast something you can neutralize feels a bit bad in a deck that wants to be making the most of its mana and does have a lowish curve. So, I mean, I know Shark Typhoon costs 6, but realistically my curve stops at 4 for Extinction Event. So, yeah, holding up 3 mana is a fair bit. This is the land base here. Scroll down. So the Fabled Passage is nice to fill up the graveyard for Croxer again. I have considered swapping one of these swamps for an extra Castle Locktwain. Still considering that. If you guys have any suggestions about my land base, please do get in on the comments and let me know. I've just got the 2 temples. The Scry is nice, but we ultimately have a lot of lands that are coming into play tapped and or hurting us, so I wanted to keep the tap lands to a minimum. I'll just pop over to the sideboard real quick. We've got 1 extra Soul Guide Lantern for mainly for decks with Uro. It's also really useful against cycling, but I haven't really seen much of that in Platinum. 2 Maya's Grasp. This was originally in the main deck. Obviously plays really well with Lurrus as repeatable removal, but as I've said, most of the decks that I come up against are Ramp or Wilderness Reclamation. Maya's Grasp is not useful in those matchups, as the creatures they tend to play Uro, which is a 6/6 Hydroid Kratos in the ramp decks, which very rarely comes down at a point that this is relevant. It's really only relevant in more creature-based matchups like aggro decks, to a certain extent the mono-green lists. So this came into the sideboard when Mystical Dispute. So I had 2 of these and 2 Neutralize in the main board. Moved Grasp to the sideboard, brought in the 4 Mystical Disputes and cut the Neutralize. And since making that change, I honestly have not boarded this in that option. It's a really, that often. It is a really nice interaction with Lurrus, but it's just not particularly well positioned in the meta at the moment, and that's also part of why I included Soul Guide Lantern to get a little bit more value out of Lurrus in those matchups where I need that. Noxious Grasp is a pretty new addition. It's very good at answering green and white things, so Teferi, Nissa, who's making a comeback, kills off an Uro. It's good against Simic Flash decks that I've seen a couple of. It's obviously great against mono green Stumpy, which is the reason I put it in here. I was coming across a few of those and felt I just wanted a little bit more removal. Dreadhorde Butcher, this comes in a lot of the time. It's good against ramp decks, it's good against Reclamation. Any decks that take, those first few turns off setting up, this can come down and apply a lot of pressure for not much mana, and is also recurable with Lurrus. My bigger Grixis control style lists will typically have Legion Warboss instead of this. I do kind of miss Warboss Dreadhorde Butcher has been great for me though. It does fit the curve better, and the synergy with Lurrus puts it over the top in this. 2 Narset. She's great. I think Narset is a great card. I've run her in most of my Grixis lists. She could potentially be in the main board. She's helpful against the ramp lists. She's helpful against Reclamation. She's actually very helpful against Reclamation. She puts them in a difficult position where they have to waste an explosion on her and not draw anything, or spend 2 Scorching Dragonfires. So typically against Reclamation, I will play her and not activate her unless I know she's going to be removed. If I know that my opponent has removal for her the next turn, I may activate just to get some value, but yeah, typically my plan there is to not tick her down at all, because they do have Scorching Dragonfire. She's also an absolute beating against cycling decks if you come across those. She's just very good against a lot of things at the moment. Ikoria the Canarium is in here for aggro matchups. I've had a few different things in this spot. I've had an extra extinction event, I've had Ritual of Soot, I've had other forms of removal. I had Dead Weight to try and go against mono red. But honestly, I've only come up against mono red twice, and that was before I hit Platinum. It's helpful against Cat Oven, as it will get rid of the cat. So I decided to go with this. It's frustrating that it does kill our own Lurrus and get rid of it permanently, but it's probably the best thing I can have in this spot against aggro decks. Enter the God Eternals, also helpful against aggro decks. Not so helpful against Cat Oven decks, as they can usually sack whatever you're targeting, so you don't gain the life. But you do still get the Amass token. This could potentially change. I did have it in here more as a hedge against mono red and other more classic aggro decks, but I haven't seen a lot of those. I did run into a Knights deck today, although that totally wrecked me and this did not come into play. And then I've got Chandra, Awakened Inferno, just as a larger threat for longer matchups. So this will come in often against the ramp decks, because those matches do tend to drag out a little bit. She can't be countered, which is nice. This realistically could be a number of things. This could be a Liliana. This could be Nicol Bolas Dragon God. I specifically didn't want to use Dragon God, even though I am a big Nicol Bolas fanboy. I didn't want to use him because he's blue and vulnerable to Mystical Dispute. Obviously she can't be countered, which is helpful against the couple of flash decks that are still bouncing around. I've come across a few Is It Tempo, Simic Flash. I played against a Bant Flash list today, so she can be helpful there. She can be helpful against aggressive matches to sweep the board, even though 6 mana is a bit steep. She can't be countered, which is nice. This is, both of these are rather flexible spots. But this is what I'm running with for now. Plus I'm just also a bit of a fan. So generally what I found with the deck is I've had overall more wins than losses against Reclamation and Ramp decks. I've done very poorly against aggressive decks. I would not recommend this in an aggro heavy meta. It's particularly useless against sacrifice-based decks. Rakdos Sacrifice and John Sacrifice are very bad matchups for me, to the point I don't even know what I would change or could change to make that matchup approachable, other than potentially putting Leyline of the Void in my sideboard. But the problem with that is that I would be running Leyline of the Void in my sideboard. It's great if you have it in your opening hand. It shuts down a fair bit of what that deck is trying to do. But at every other point, it's awful. It's awful in multiples, but you have to run it as like a 3 or 4 of to maximize your chances of getting it in your opening hand. I did briefly have it in here, and I ended up taking it out because I was very underwhelmed by it. I thought it might also be decent against cycling, but again, if you don't have it in your opening hand, it's useless. Soulguide Lantern is actually much better against cycling, as it can come down at whatever point and shuts off Zenith Flare for as long as it's on the battlefield. Even if it comes down later and they've already cycled a bunch of cards into their graveyard, you can still sack the Lantern at instant speed and remove their graveyard, which you can't do with Leyline. but that's the only thing I can think of that might make the sacrifice matchups approachable. Honestly, I've just sort of resigned myself to the fact that that's a bad matchup. I've got the couple of Cries in there and the God Eternals for aggro. I wasn't, and Maya's Grasp. Beyond that, I wasn't willing to do much more. I just don't think it's a great matchup. As I said, Reclamation I've won more than I've lost. Ramp decks I've won more than I've lost. I definitely wouldn't say that those are heavily favoured matches. It is a bit of a slog. You do need to be careful about your plays, but it is fun. I do enjoy this sort of grindy playstyle. It's a lot more effective than I thought it would be. I think partly due to people overvaluing Lurrus. I did have 4 of him in the deck previously because of how frequently he tends to be removed. He just has a giant target on him, and a lot of players over prioritize removing him when there are more relevant things that they could be doing. But yeah, that's the deck. We're going to be putting up a few gameplay videos, which I hope you enjoy. If you have any comments or feedback or ideas for changes you think I should make or anything of that nature, please do sound off in the comments. I do think there's some changes I could make to the sideboard. As I said, like Chandra, Enter the God Eternals, Cry the Carnarium, even Maya's Grasp don't see a whole lot of play. Chandra sees a bit, but she could realistically be anything else. Shark Typhoon also does double duty as that high-end permanent for games that go long. You can just hard cast it, and it is probably a little more effective as a top-end threat than any of the planeswalkers that are available. I guess like Thought Distortion is something I could look into, but again, it's very expensive. As I said, my curve sort of tops out at 4. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any ideas for things I could change in the deck. And yeah, with that, let's jump into a game and see how we go. Okay, so this hand is pretty terrible. I do hate to mulligan, but I just don't think I can keep this. Of course I pressed the wrong button, because I'm not paying enough attention, so here we are. We'll just have to make it work. So I'm going to lead with some tapped land. So it looks like we're up against probably a ramp deck, seeing a breeding pool there. So I'll probably have a few turns to play with. I can try to cycle Shark Typhoon to create a creature and draw into something in a few turns. If there's Sultai, probably Sultai Ramp. I'm having some issues with my mouse here, so please excuse the jerky movements. Yep, happy to just keep playing things out tap. I may play out Lurrus next turn. They're eyeballing my lands. Probably a little confused to see Grixis colors. It's not very very played in the meta at the moment. Yep. Alright. Okay, so I think we play out the Lurrus here. They're a long ways off escaping Uro, which is good. Agonizing Remorse. I guess this would be Shark Typhoon. That sucks. I really was hoping to cycle that. Extinction Event will answer Uro when they do bring it back. And we'll see what they do. Certainly taking more time thinking about it. Ingress Rampage. And I'll play another one of my tapped lands. So I now very comfortably have access to double black and double red to escape the Proxer if I want to. Quick see casualties of war here. Which is not really the end of the world at this point in the game. 20 more lands. Okay, we did not see it. So I'm going to attack with the Lurrus. Soul Guide Lantern would have been nice over the last few turns to get some value out of it. Okay, that's unfortunate. So we'll get rid of that. Again, sorry about this, having some problems with my mouse. Play this tapped. Okay, and now they can bring back Uro. They do know we have the extinction event though. Okay, Soul Guide Lantern of their own. Interesting. Get rid of the Lurrus. Doesn't really matter, I don't have anything in the deck to bring that back. As I said, it does tend to be overvalued, but I guess there's nothing in there relevant anyway. Okay, play another Uro. And if they try to escape the Uro in from the graveyard, I will dispute it, stop them drawing the card and gaining life. Looks like they are. I can see them hovering over their graveyard there. Respect the dispute, man. You gotta respect the dispute. Okay, now the Soul Guide Lantern, a little bit late to the party. Get rid of one of their Uros. I'm going to just leave this here. It is pretty tempting to pop it to draw a card. But we'll see how the next couple of turns play out. Definitely if I draw into another one, I'll be cracking this to draw a card. Red Spiral seems fine. Does fill their graveyard, but it also indicates they don't really have anything in their hand at the moment. Of course, neither do we. So normally it'd be better to play this tapped, so I don't have to worry about shocking it potentially at some later point, although I do have plenty of mana, been flooding a bit. But since they already know about this one, I'll play that to avoid giving them perfect information, and we'll pass it back to them. They can of course start scrying, which is unfortunate. Castle Locthwain would be nice here. Or another Lurrus, so we could sack the Lantern to draw. Okay, so their blast zone's up to 2. Big old Grixis, that's very unfortunate. So we obviously have an answer in Extinction Event. Yeah, we're flooding pretty badly at this point. because of which it is quite unlikely we'll come back from this point, as our opponent is 5 cards up on us and with the euro in the bin. Yeah. Okay, I'll give myself a couple of draws to see if I can get out of this.
Seek shelter in my stewardship.
Unfortunately, flooding will do this. As I said, we only need about 5 or 6 lands for the deck to function.
The land
Drawn
fights for us.
quite a bit more than that in a relatively smaller amount of our deck. Okay, so at this point I'm going to draw a card. Mystical Dispute's a bit late to the party now that they've got unlimited mana and more land. Okay, I'm going to save everyone a bit of time and throw this one in. It's a little bit frustrating, but what can you do? Okay, so in this matchup, Narset's helpful to stop them drawing cards. Dreadhorde Butcher is very helpful to keep some pressure on them. Lantern can answer Uro, and Chandra can be a helpful top-end threat, as I've mentioned. Noxious Grasp also does a better version of Heartless Act than Heartless Act does in this matchup. With the extra Lantern, we don't need Extinction Event as much. I dare say we even go down to no copies, even though it is a nice answer. And then we have 5 more cuts to make. So I'm thinking probably Rampage. I guess they do have their own Soul Guide Lantern, which it might be nice to answer, although they can just sack it in response. So it's not a good answer to that. And I've got Rider and Noxious Grasp to kill things at instant speed. So that's an easy enough cut. I don't really want to go down below 6 kill spells, because it is just nice to be comfortable that you have an answer on hand when they play an Uro or a Grixis. I can cut a couple of ops pretty comfortably. What else do I cut here? Maybe I do just cut another Rider and try to be a little more proactive. So my opening hand here, I'd really like to see a Butcher and some disruption like a Thought Erasure. Obviously I'm going to take the play. Okay, so I don't have the Butcher. I do have Thought Erasure. I've got Croxar. I've got a nice mix of lands and some low cost spells, so I think I'll keep. I'm going to open on Temple of Malice. I'd rather hold Soul Guide Lantern until I can get some value out of playing it. I don't think I need an extra land right at the moment. I've also got the Surveil of Thought Erasure to fix draws if I need to, but yeah, I'd rather draw into something that lets me be a little more aggressive. Show me what you got. So Extinction Event, Shark Typhoon, and Uro. I think I take Uro, stop them from ramping. I don't need the Rider at the moment as I have Noxious Grasp, but my mouse will not let me bin it. So next turn is looking like Croxar. Yep, unfortunately I don't have the untapped blue source to play Narset this turn. Croxar. So the choice here is to shock in Blood Crypt to play the Lantern and get rid of Uro, or play the Temple of Deceit to make sure I can play Narset next turn. I would like to hold the Stride till a bit later, but I'm not in a rush to get rid of Uro. It's a while before they can do anything about it. Cruxer is about as good as anything else at the moment. But yeah, I think guaranteeing I can get the Narset down next turn is more valuable than getting rid of Uro immediately. So I think we shock in the Blood Crypt, play the Lantern. Okay, so they're holding up some kind of interaction, although it could just be the Sharp Typhoon. Obviously we target the Uro here, and then we'll try to resolve Narset. Obviously don't want to see a counter spell here, but
Those who
they
cannot
do not.
perceive beyond
So they
the
can
reality
cycle their Shark Typhoon
are
to make
lost.
a 1-1 at the moment. I think I'm pretty safe to activate and get value.
Keep an open mind.
Thought Erasure is always nice, so next turn I can hit their hand pretty hard and fill up my graveyard a bit as well to get Cruxer out. So we haven't seen Dreadhorde Butcher, which is unfortunate, as it is a pretty important part of the game plan to keep some pressure on them. But we're not doing too badly. Yep, as I said, they can cycle and make a 1-1.
Reckless and ill-refined.
Okay, yep, go to my turn. Shark Typhoon of my own is not bad. So do I hold up Shark Typhoon and try to kill this? I think it's better to hit their hand. Casualties of War. Well, I definitely don't want them playing that. I don't know that I need yet another Cruxer. I think I'd rather start drawing into some lands. Five in my bin here. So I think we play this Cruxer that we have, make them discard one of their lands. And then next turn I should be able to bring one of these back. So they'll probably discard the forest here. If they do something useful, they're better off holding it and taking the damage. Blast Zone has usefulness, Castle Vantress has usefulness. And the 3 damage is probably less relevant than letting me know whatever else it is that they drew. We'll attack down the Narset again.
You cannot see your folly.
Turn. Okay, so I have 6 cards in the bin. If I escape Cruxer, I need to exile 2 other Cruxers to do it, which is not really where I want to be. Let's take the Scry. And I think what I do here is hold up the Shark Typhoon to cycle at end of turn. I could also pop the Lantern to throw that in my yard and only have to get rid of the 1 Cruxer. But again, it's not something I really want to exile because I can replay it from Lurrus to get a bit of extra value. Of course, leaving the Cruxes in the bin leaves us very vulnerable to a Soulguide Lantern from our opponent. Crack the Fabled Passage, seems fine. Okay, so this is looking at casualties. So takes the surprise factor away, but I think what I do here is cycle Shark Typhoon. It means I can't ambush their Shark token, but it's fine. That's fine. Auto pay. And then pop this to exile their graveyard. Obviously Narset dies, and I lose a land.
You are a mighty
It's not
warrior.
the end of the world.
I concede.
I've still got access to what I need to bring back Croxa, and now I also have blue to hold up for Mystical Dispute. So, 2, 3. Come on, mouse. Come on, you can do it. You and you. Beautiful. Because our opponent is far from out of this game. A Euro helps them get back in. Hydroid Grixis obviously, although I have a counter for that. I assume they know I have a counter though. They can get in for 1 here if they want. They choose not to. Attacking both. So if they have anything relevant, now's the time to play it. They do not. I assume they block the Croxa. So what they could do is block the Croxa, hump the Blast Zone to 2, and kill off Croxa next turn. But between Opt and a potential Mystical Dispute or Noxious Grasp, we will be able to bring Croxa back the turn after anyway. Let's see if they've seen that line. Okay, they choose to Scry instead. See if they can find something to get out of this. 2 to the bottom, that's always good. So there is an argument to play Opt now, so if I draw a land I can play it, but I think I just hold it up and leave my opponent guessing. It's a pretty good position for us at the moment. Questing Beast, if I Mystical Dispute, they can still get it down, that's fine then. Just grasp. Let them attack. This may well prompt the concession. Why did it tap my blue mana? Gives us the good game. I lied about it. Okay, so my opponent is on the play, so I can afford to cut a land here. I usually cut a Temple of Malice. There's an argument that I should cut the Temple of Deceit because a turn 2 Dreadhorde Butcher is potentially more important than a turn 2 Thought Erasure. So I might try that for a change. Again, if my mouse will respond. And I think I just bring back an Opt, to be honest. I'm always tempted with the Murderous Rider, but you know, they do have the extra threats in Questing Beast. But yeah, I think I'm happy with Opt. Seems like our opponent's changing their sideboarding strategy a little bit. Your opponent's choosing to play first. Okay, I've got turn 2 Butcher into turn 3 Lurrus. I've got a Shark Typhoon to cycle. I would like some disruption, but this is a pretty good hand. So I'm going to start on Watery Grave. Hopefully they don't have Agonizing Remorse. Red Spiral's fine. Shock in the Blood Crypt. Get to work. Okay, they're shocking in themselves, so it seems like they've got some kind of play here. Could just be Shark Typhoon. That's still fine. I kill the token and deal 2 to the head. And I can follow up with Lurrus and bring back Butcher the next turn. Yep. Called it. Unfortunately can't Noxious Grasp here to blow them out. But as I said, not the end of the world. So we just need to hope Lurrus survives till our next turn. It is a bit of an ask, to be honest, but it's the play we've got at the moment. I think it's better to play him now and risk it than wait 2 more turns to guarantee playing him and Butcher. It gives our opponent a lot of time to set up. Extinction Event, that's unfortunate, but not much we can really do about it. Okay, so I think at this point Fabled Passage, so that end of turn I can Shark Typhoon for 2 if I need to. And get a few lands out of the deck. So I've got a few more than I would like at the moment, and I'd really like to draw into some action. Yep, so at this point I Shark Typhoon. I think I go for red, just to carry in. I've got enough red sources. So I guess black, doesn't really matter. Again, if my mouse will allow me. I'm going to cycle this. I don't know what I'm going to draw, so that unknown has very little value. This at the least has some guaranteed value, which I can make sure I get. Yeah, and now all they have to take is Noxious Grasp, which I would rather keep. But at least I have a 2, which is more than I would have otherwise. So unfortunately we are flooding pretty hard here. Mystical Dispute's not that helpful, so I'm going to go with Temple of Malice. Dreadhorde Butcher's nice, I'll take that definitely. Opponent down to 12. I'm just hoping my mouse battery doesn't die before the end of the game. Big ol' snack. I'm gonna counter that because I don't have another way to get rid of the body, and I really do want to get through the future. I'll still draw a card, but that's fine. I've got heaps of those. Get in for 3, throw the Butcher. I think Fabled Passage just to... I know that thinning the deck is statistically insignificant, but lets me feel like I'm doing something, you know? Extinction Event, this will be uneven, no doubt, to handle the Butcher. And we'll also get rid of the token, that's unfortunate. Okay. Holy mother of flood. Thought Erasure's nice. Okay, so they got Growth Spiral and 2 Casualties of War and 2 Ether Ghost. So, I think I take a casualties. I definitely don't want to get casualties twice. Growth Spell does let them potentially draw into something proactive. So it's the only proactive play they have, so there's an argument to take that. But I think overall casualties is going to be more impactful. I don't mind a Soul Guide. They've got a fair bit in their yard here. It'd be nice to shut down an Uro. And it also lets me redraw, which is honestly probably what I'll use it for. Steam Vent's tapped, no point in saving it. I know the Soul Guide's a little bit of a low impact play, but if they draw into an Uro, it's nice to have the answer. Okay. Mouse difficulties again. And I will get rid of the Grixis. Makes no difference. Yep. So I think at this point the correct decision is to draw at the end of their turn, unless I see an Uro this turn. I don't really want to leave them with 8 cards in the graveyard, but I'm facing a full rip from them. Me with nothing in hand. They're obviously trying to hang on to the casualties to get maximum value. Shock Typhoon would be a nice draw. Okay, so draw a card here. Four lands. Okay, so cycling would be nice. We've gone through 3 casualties. I don't know how many they're running, but I think the amount of value I get from hard casting this is worth the risk that they have removal for it this turn. Got mana and graveyard to bring him back, which is unfortunate. That will allow them to take over the game very quickly if they can't draw into an answer. So a land, me drawing a land here leaves me as a bit of a sitting duck, so fingers crossed. Okay, Chandra, that's nice, that's very nice. So the question is, do I minus her to kill Uro and let her die? Plus 2ing, they're going to be gaining 3 a turn from Uro, so I will get a 6/6, which I can keep as a blocker. They would need to have a removal spell. Okay, so they can Ethergust this, that's also important to know. Can't Ethergust the token though. Getting ahead of myself, thinking what I want to do when it resolves. So I will take the action because that's a guaranteed 6/6 shark token next turn as well. So this makes it difficult for them to attack with Uro. So they're trying to draw into an answer. I will happily take this trade. They can bring him back, that's fine. Maybe I shouldn't have taken the trade so that they couldn't get the extra draw trigger. Yeah, I kind of regret taking that trade now. should have known they were up to some shenanigans. Dust again. I will take action again. So, if they attack, I think at this point I need to block again, and they're on a lower life. It might have made sense to be a little more aggressive, soak up the hit. But, you know, it's generating a life of 9. I'm only doing 6 damage. They're on a very healthy life total. Get another Ethergust. That's fine. Obviously, at a different stage of the game, 3 Ethergusts in a row would be quite crippling, but with this down, it's just giving me a 6/6 each turn. There's not really much in my deck that's significantly better than a guaranteed 6/6 flyer each turn. They can't bring back Uro at this point. Okay, they've got a 9/9, and now they can bring back Uro, but they'll need to get rid of one to do it. No, I'm not going to block. This has been a very interesting game. I'm surprised they didn't hardcast their Shark Typhoon. Okay, so they're wondering, do they bring back the Uro and sacrifice the other one? This is not looking good. So obviously we play the Shanga. Fourth Ethergust. Oh, they have it. Our opponent's got us, but this has been a fun game nevertheless. 4 Ethergusts in a row is a little hard to come back from. What are the odds of that? All 4 in a row. Fucking fine, guys. Shuffler's fine. So I have considered playing Ethergusts of my own. I don't really like the card that much.
You look flammable enough.
Get rid of the 0.
Utterly is the best way to destroy things.
If this were an unsummon. So I've only seen one Dreadhorde Butcher this whole game, haven't I? Admittedly, my last 5, no, 2, there you go. My last 5 draws have been sharp. Nice draw. Well, that was a fun game. It would have been nice to show you guys a win, but it is enough to give you some idea of what the deck does and how it can win when little things go a little bit differently. You know, we could have got that game, had a couple of things gone our way. It didn't win our opponent's way. That's fine. It was a fun game. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you all later.